Hi, everybody. I'm Bobby Hamm. I am the supervisor for arts education in East Windsor Regional School District. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. Today, we're going to be discussing equity. We're going to be discussing some of the work of the NJMEA IDEA Committee, which stands for Inclusiveness, Diversity, Equity, and Access. And we're going to have some discussions and a bit of a reality check in terms of, are we really including all of our students in our ensembles and in all of our music programs. So let's begin with our presentation today. So our key points really are going to be reviewing the key points from the committee data work. We're going to consider ways how individual teachers can review school programs with an equity lens, and we also want to consider some implications for music education in the long term. So a little bit about the data work is we wanted to create a baseline source of data for NJMEA to use and inform decisions relating to inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. So the four big areas that we reviewed was looking at the performance literature from all state ensembles from the period of 2009 to 2020. We're going to review a membership survey results of non-traditional ensembles, reviewing all state and student region participants from 2009 to 2020, and finally, music teacher distribution. This work was conducted from April of 2019 until last month. If you have any questions or comments, I encourage everybody to contact me. There is my email. Also, I do encourage everybody to download the full report. It is quite lengthy, so I do encourage everyone to really download it and take some time and read through that. So I'll just give everyone a few seconds to get your phone out and scan your QR code, and you can hopefully get that onto your drives. So the first part of the data review was reviewing the performance literature from the all-state ensembles from 2009 to 2020. And you can see from that time period that consisted of 261 unique composers and 286 unique pieces. The goal in this review was to look at the background of these composers. So when you see the first piece of data, you can see that the background of the vast majority of composers are white. You see that who are Black or African American, Asian, Hispanic, or Latino. When you look at composers by gender, we see we are overwhelmingly, the all-state groups are performing concert literature by men. The origin country, you can see about 53% of composers originate from the United States. Most of the composers were alive at the time of the performance. And with respect to vocal works, you see that the small majority, but still the majority of concert literature was in English, with you see the next largest chunk being in Latin. From a musicology standpoint, you see where the music was coming from. And in this area, we were pretty well diverse, but you do see the breakdown by musicology. So to sum up this section of the data, we're seeing that the majority of performance literature, as performed by the all-state ensembles, was composed by majority white composers, mostly American composers, by men, composed by composers who were alive at the time, with the lyrics of vocal selections in English. The next section of data that we looked at was a membership survey of non-traditional ensembles. So in this case, we asked membership, what non-traditional ensembles may you be working with your students? We sent this out via Tempo Express, social media posts. There were 2 requests for responses, and overall we had 28 responses, which, as you can see, sampled down to 24. We also did a survey with higher ed. You see there was even less response. So from the instrumentation, you see that there is from the small sample size, we do have a mix of instrumentation. You see unpitched percussion, guitar type instruments. Whoa. Okay, but you see that these ensembles, even though small in number, we do see that they are rehearsing on a regular basis. and that these students who are participating in the ensembles are receiving an academic grade. However, based on the limited survey results, we can really summarize that the student participation in these non-traditional ensembles is very limited from what we can gauge from the survey, and we can also say that these ensembles tend to emerge from classroom music settings, general music, and they're not necessarily formal groups. We're now getting into the next section, which this is the largest section that we reviewed. This is the largest chunk of data, where we took a review for over 10 years of all state and region ensemble student participation. So what we did was we created an equity lens, and what we did was we estimated demographics of student participants based on the total demographics within the district that these students are coming from. And also, to be clear, when we say district, we do mean any public school. So private schools and homeschools, that was factored out, but we are looking, we do include charter schools in this conversation, and so any taxpayer funded schools. So we're looking at three big things. We're looking at, based on the estimated demographics of participants, is student participation reflective of total state or region population and demographics? Based on the districts represented in the all state or region groups, is a percentage of represented districts of socioeconomic groups reflective of the total state or region socioeconomic groups? And based on district representation in all state and region groups, is the percentage of represented districts of majority racial demographics reflective of the total state or region majority racial demographics? And one thing that I want to really make clear is that reflective is not the same thing as represented. So if we're representing something, it means we're looking for maybe just one or two. That's not the case here. We're looking to be reflective of the total within the state or the region. Okay, so again, just a quick note about the data was that the district-wide data is derived from publicly available DOE data posted on their website from that particular year. So for example, in 2012 to 13, we used the data from that school year, okay, for each year in these comparisons, okay? The estimated data, the ensemble participants based on the district's actual demographics for that year. We have actual data, which again is based on the district's demographic data and the district that the ensemble participants represent for that year. And again, as I mentioned, a district may be an actual school district or a charter school. Some notes. Auditionees are students who at least auditioned for but did not necessarily make the ensemble. When we say band auditionee, refers to wind, brass, percussion. Orchestra auditionees are strings only. Wind players who participate in the orchestra were counted for both ensembles. Some years we found that the orchestra participants based on wind and percussion players, based on the data that I had that was available to us, and we had no choral data available for the regions. So question one, based on the estimated demographics of participants, is student participation reflective of the total state or region population demographics? So this chart shows the 9 to 12 statewide population trend, okay? And we're not talking total, population of the state. We're talking this 9-12 student population in grades 9 to 12, okay? And we see that there's a steady, let me get the pointer up here. You see that there's a steady decline in the white population. We see a somewhat of a decline in the black population. The Hispanic population is increasing over the 10 years, and the Asian population, there's a slow but steady increase. Okay. Oops. So now that you've seen the total population, again, here in blue, you see the total population. But here is the all-state group average. You see there's a difference. You see that gap there between the, you see that in 2019, 2020, well, the white population in 9 to 12 was about 46%, and you see that the participation in the all states was like 70%. And then you see here, there's a difference. You see the difference, and the average annual difference is almost 20 points higher, okay? When we move to the next population group, we see the black participants. You see a gap here that we're well below it, and you see that we're almost 13 points under, and you can see the average annual difference. And just one thing to take into context, that's almost that this point here is almost 70 points under the white population. We move into the Hispanic population, that we see a trend up, but we're still well under. We're well under, and not reflective necessarily of the statewide population. The Asian population, again, you see where we are, and you see that average annual difference. So let's go back to the original question. Based on the estimated demographics of participants, is the student participation reflective? Okay, and we were trying to be in like a 10-point range. So we're trying to be 5 points above, 5 points below. And you can see here, you see that for all states, you see that we're in the red for Black, we're in the red for Hispanic, we're well under, we're not in that 5-point range. Okay, and even regions you see similar. And when you average out the regions, so you're averaging these three numbers out, you see a clear pattern. Okay, just let me move the cursor around to, there it goes. So over the course of time, when you start counting the instances, okay, so over the course of time, every year there in the all states, you see at least there are 50% of instances where we are below the statewide demographic. Every year there are at least 30% of instances that were above statewide demographic. Only 1 year or 15% of the instances in range within that statewide demographic. For 2019, 2020, we were able to add a demographic group. That fifth demographic group would be based on economically disadvantaged students. So when we say economically disadvantaged, that's any students who are on free or reduced lunch. And the reason we were only able to do it for 2019, 2020 was because the state changed the way the data was reported. So it was easier for us to calculate this. And you see again that you see the difference. So statewide, about a third of the state's population is on free or reduced lunch. And you can see where we are when you average out the groups in the all-state groups, all groups averages, okay? You see a difference of 24, 20 points, okay? And again, the regions look very, very similar. So for some shock and some awe, right? These are the count of times that we estimate that there were 0 of a demographic in that participant, in that group, okay? And we do have to say that one of the groups where we estimate that there were no participants, and was one of the years, was the All-State Jazz Choir. And again, we count the times across the groups where there was at least one, but less than 1% of the estimated demographic participants. So when we boil this all down and we interpret the first question, so the short answer is no. Across the board, Black and Hispanic student participation is not reflective of the total population in all state and region ensembles for both performers and auditionees. Anecdotally, we have to say that we think that these estimates may be on the high side for Black and Hispanic students. And based on the 1 year which was available to us for economic disadvantage, we don't feel it's reflective of the total population in all state and region ensembles. So the next question was, based on districts represented in the all state and region groups, is the percentage of the districts that are represented in the groups of socioeconomic groups reflective of the total? So here's our trend statewide, and we see group 1, which we consider a district in group 1 is less than 25% free or reduced lunch, economic disadvantage, and we see it's decreasing. We see groups 2 and 3. So group 2 would be the district is 25 to 50% economic disadvantage, and group 3 is 50 to 75% economic disadvantage. We feel that we see there's an increase, and group 4, which is over 75%, is about the same. So these are the statewide trends for all districts across the state with respect to which economic disadvantage group we're putting them in. Okay, so here's group 1, and group 1 compared to the all states. So this is saying that in the average, right, of the districts represented, we see that over 75% of districts represented in the all states ensembles are coming from group 1. So that's saying that those are all districts where the free and reduced lunch population is under 25%. And you see that here is the statewide count, it's just under 50% for the last year here. And you see the trend, okay? And you see the gap. Okay, and you see that there's an annual difference, an average annual difference of 29 points. You see group 2, and you see the difference we're under, okay? You see group 3, and you see there's this gap. And what becomes shocking, okay, is when we get into group 4, we're seeing some years where it was at 0, and there was no representation from these districts in our all-state groups, okay? And if you remember, we're just, excuse me, you see that the districts represented from group 4 are just over 0%, okay? And if you remember from group 1, okay, group 1 was way over here at about 80%. So 80% from group 1, okay? And you go all the way down here to see where group 4 is in terms of representation in the all-state groups. So now if we go back to our original question, you see that clearly we are in the red for groups 2, 3, and 4, and we're very well above for group 1, again, which is those are districts whose population are less than 25% economic disadvantage. Regions look very much the same, and when you see the average of the regions, you see the annual average. The difference here is, again, very well for group 1, over by 20 points, while we're in the red for groups 2, 3, and 4. So again, over the course of time, when we look at a range summary, right? Again, are we 5 points above, 5 points below? Only 1 year our represented districts are in range, okay, over 20% of the time. All the years are over 50% of below range, and most years are 60% below range for all states. All years are at least 25% above range, and the regions do look similar. So when we go to interpret the question and answer the question with the data, the short answer is no. Consistently, the majority of districts represented across all state and region groups are in group 1, which is less than 25% economic disadvantage, or in group 2, which is 25 to 50% economic disadvantaged. When we move on to question 3 now, so we're looking at district representation in all state region groups based on majority racial demographics. Are these being reflective of total statewide region majority racial demographics? Again, now we start to see that we have, you see the trend that the number of districts who have a white population majority are decreasing, but our numbers in terms of all state representation are staying about the same. Okay, and you see there's an annual difference of 20%, about 20%. You see that there are years we are representing no districts that are majority Black. Okay. You see we are increasing in the majority number of Hispanic districts, and we're under 5% for all state representation, and we're a little all over the place for majority Asian districts. So again, we go back to that original question, okay, and based on that district representation in all state region groups, what percentage of represented districts are coming from those majority racial demographics? Are we being reflective again? And do you see that for all state, you see the difference of over 20 points. You see for region average is over by 12 points, and you again can see our trend that we're in the red for representing districts that are majority Black or majority Hispanic. So again, if we go to interpret the data, the short answer is no. We are consistently representative in the all state and region groups by majority white districts, and the districts that are being represented are not reflective of the number for Black and Hispanic districts for state and region wide. So the next big piece of data that we looked at was NJMEA music teacher membership distribution. So in other words, we're looking at how our members, NJMEA members, distributed across the state and regions. So our equity lens here is when we compare overall membership data, how represented are NJMEA members when the districts are grouped by racial and socioeconomic demographics. And on that note, there are two questions we ask. Is there at least one member in a district, and how deep is that representation within the district? And then we also look at it from the lens of individual members, right? When we compare overall membership data, how many individual NJMEA members are teaching in districts as viewed by racial and socioeconomic demographic groups? So just a note about data, again, this is a district view, not a school view. And again, district means public school or charter school, again, taxpayer funded schools. We are factoring out private schools. This is a teacher count only. So just to make that clear, retirees, administrators, including me, other members were factored out. And we're looking at the demographics, student demographics of where teachers work. We're not looking to see how many music teachers may be white, black, Hispanic, or Asian. We're looking at where they work. The actual racial demographics of teachers, of music teachers, that's not available. NAFME does not keep that information, so that was just not available to look at. Okay, and when we talk about groups, very similar to the previous section, we're using, again, group 1 is under 25%, group 2 would be 25 to 50%, group 3 is 51 to 75%, and group 4 is over 75%. Okay, so again, our definitions, we're looking at district representation based on total population. For baseline data, we're looking at the overall membership compared to total music teacher population. Okay, so obviously perfect, which we don't have, would be 100% of music teachers would be members. However, ideal, how close is each demographic group to the statewide or region-wide baseline membership data? And again, are we in range? Is that membership representation, and for this time, is at least half of what the ideal membership representation would be? So here we start looking at from the view of district representation. We see the total number of districts, and we see where we have a count of at least one NJMEA member in that district. And we're actually looking at about statewide where members are there's at least one member represented in half of all districts statewide, and it's about similar to you see for the regions. Okay, and you get a sense of where the depth of membership is in terms of when we see how we have less than 25% of the music teacher population is a member, and so on and so forth. So again, ideally, we want membership in each group to be about 50% of the total number of districts in that group. So how often is statewide representation in range with at least one member by demographic group? So when we look at group 1, so this is stating that where we have districts which have a white population of less than 25%, the actual membership representation is 862%. So ideally, we would want 11. So are we in range? The difference to the ideal, are we in range? No. And you can see, again, consistently for districts, and when you look at it from the lens of Black and Hispanic in terms of those population groups, in terms of how large those groups are, you see it's consistently we're not in range, we're not in range, we're not in range here, and we're not in range here. So again, this is where we're saying we're not in range for districts which are over 75% Black population, and not in range for districts that are over 50% between 50 and 75% population Black. Okay, and again, we did use economically disadvantaged as a actual demographic group again, so you can see where we're in range and where we're not in range. And surprisingly, which is a good thing, we're actually in range for districts which are over 75% economically disadvantaged. So when we start looking at the depth of membership, we do have to say that this research, it was inconclusive to determine the depth of membership, meaning among music teacher population based on demographic groups. And again, the regions were also inconclusive. So this is just saying that in terms of, it was very difficult for us to make a determination in terms of how many members in a district based on demographic groups. So we go back to the original question. Again, district representation when compared to overall membership data, how represented are NJMEA members when districts are grouped by racial and socioeconomic demographics? So do we have at least one member in a district? So when we look at it from the white perspective, we're 4 out of 4 across statewide and in each region. For Black, we're 0 out of 4 across the board. We're mixed for Hispanic, Asian, and we are more represented in terms of economically disadvantaged groups. And again, the depth of membership was inconclusive. So we interpret the data and answer the question, is there at least one member in a district? So the answer to this is, while overall about half of districts, both statewide and region-wide, have at least one member per district, the representation is not equally distributed across demographic groups. It's most pronounced when viewing districts by Black student populations, and membership representation is inconsistently distributed across groups. When we look at individual membership, the total music teacher population across the state, we have in our public schools 3,676 music teachers across the state. That is from the DOE. That was based on an OPRA request that I made to the Department of Ed, and based on the 1920 school year. We have 1,363 members, teacher members, so that boils down to about 37% of all music teachers are also members. And again, administrators, retirees were all factored out. Okay, so when we start looking at individual membership, again, looking at it when we have the group one, what the actual percentage is, okay, and we see where we again, about 37% of music teachers are members region-wide, so ideally 37% of music teachers in each group are members, and we see the difference today. Ideal for, again, for white populations, where the white population is under 25%, and again, where we down here we see the Black population would be in group 4 over 75%, and you see how the difference is to the ideal. And when it all boils down, again, Black majority districts are not in range. Hispanic supermajority district, that's over 75% of the population is Hispanic. Those districts are not in range. And again, we're very similar for the region membership. So again, we go back to the original question. When we compare overall membership data, how many individual members are teaching in districts as viewed by racial and socioeconomic demographic groups? Again, white, we're in range 4 out of 4, 4 out of 4, 4 out of 4, 3 out of 4, and you see how often we're in range in the other demographic groups. We're actually in range for each of the economic groups. So when we go and try to interpret the data and answer the question, when compared overall membership data, how many individual members are teaching in districts as viewed by racial and socioeconomic demographic groups? While overall about 1/3 of music teachers are members, it is inconsistently distributed across racial demographic groups. It's again most pronounced when viewed by Black demographics, but it's actually a good thing that ED is consistently in range with state region-wide overall memberships. So let's start summarizing all of the data that we've looked at, and we start making the connections, and we look at the 4 big sections of data that we looked at. So, summary of all evidence. The first point becomes the majority of concert literature programmed and performed by all state ensembles come from composers who are white, Western, American, and male. For 2, non-traditional ensemble student participation across the students of members is limited. Few cases of formal ensemble structure often are included as part of classroom music structure. 3, based on estimated student demographics and actual district representation, all state and region participation is not reflective of statewide and region-wide total population compared to racial demographics and socioeconomic groups. Estimates indicate that the majority of participants are white from majority white districts and low percentage of economically disadvantaged students. And 4, on membership, overall NJMEA membership consists about 1/3 of all music teachers with representation in about half of districts. Individual membership and district representation is not evenly distributed across racial demographic groups, but are consistently spread across socioeconomics. So when we look at these 4 big summaries, when you start reading this and we start thinking about this in light of many things that have happened over the past few years in our country and the way music education is going, you start to say to yourself, do we have a problem? Or do you start to recognize the fact that we do have a problem that exists, and what are we doing to address it? So when we move on and we start making these connections, and it's based on, again, based on the data suggests, and it's fair to make these connections. When you connect parts 1 and 3, it is estimated that the majority of students who participate in all state ensembles are white, come from districts that with majority white students and few students categorized as economically disadvantaged. These students perform musical literature of mostly white American male composers. When we connect parts 3 and 4, consistency in music teacher membership distribution may have some impact on the lack of Black and Hispanic students participating in all state and region ensembles, but it does not explain it fully based on estimated student participation demographics. And when we connect parts 2 and 4, considering half of public school districts have at least one member, student participation in non-traditional ensembles is limited. And when we make one other connection in terms of the actual access to participation. When we start looking at the actual access of participation, okay, so these groups 1, 2, 3, and 4, we're gonna use these as our socioeconomic groups. You see the total student population in each of these groups. Okay, so if you see the population with access to participate in at least a Region 1 level instrumental ensemble in school year 1920, okay, we see that Group 1 has at least 87% of access of this population had access to this, and it just dramatically declines as we move into districts which are classified as higher levels of free and reduced lunch. Okay, and when we combine groups 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, you really see the dramatic differences. Okay, so we're going to define access as any student who could have participated in the region level ensemble because there was a district representation in that region level ensemble, right? And it's fair to say about 73% from districts with less than 50%, greater than 50% free and reduced lunch population, they do not have access to region-wide level instrumental ensembles. So now what? We've taken a look at the data. We've gone through a lot of detailed data, and I do encourage everyone to really dive into the full report. You can get more insight onto the regions for specifics. I also include on the full report links to most of my raw notes, so you can really dive in and see if you're interested in seeing particular schools. Okay, so now what do we do? What can we do to expand access to music education? Okay, so here's our reality check. The reality of this is not a new problem. This predates COVID, and we have to understand that music education is changing. We have to also accept the fact that our society is changing in many ways, and some of for a variety of reasons. So we as educators and music educators have to step up and meet that and meet these changes. Okay, so we know this is not a new problem, and I have to say recently I've been doing more research on this and found that there's been scholarly level articles from Journal of Research in Music Education and of the like to indicate where this research is being done. That we know this is not a new problem. We now need to take some steps as individual teachers and members in schools to help address it, to increase access to music education with an equity lens. Okay, and again, the reality check, and again, I should have said these are based on the data, but these are also my professional opinions, since that the most good for all kids will come from individual teachers making professional, data-informed decisions to expand access to active musicking. Okay, and again, that's my professional opinion, but I stand by that in the sense that we as individual teachers and educators, and whatever our role is, there are steps that we can take to help increase access to music education. Okay, and one of the goals, at least my goal as the person who is leading this report, is that we want this data to serve as a model for other music teachers, for schools, for districts to use. Okay, so we looked at 4 big points within an equity lens. There are steps that you can take in your individual schools and districts to take those steps in that equity lens, to create your own equity lens and examine your own programs. Okay, so the first step is very simply compare the demographics of your ensemble or ensembles to the total population of your grade level of your school. Okay, so, and just to be clear, somebody in your school has access to this information. You may just have to ask. So I'm an administrator. I can see my teachers' rosters, class rosters in our learning management system. I am very happy to provide that information to my teachers. But if you're, as an individual teacher, if you don't know where to find it, find your administrator and speak with them and say, how do I access this information? I'm sure they will be very helpful in helping you, see this. And this is a, this is an equity issue. We want to provide access to as much to music education to all kids possible. We know there are real problems. Please take, I encourage everyone to take the time to see what you can do to just check your current demographic profiles, right? And we want to include racial groups. In this data reporting, we looked at the 4 main groups, the 4 largest groups across the state, but we also want to include economically disadvantaged students. Okay, are your ensemble demographics reflective of the grade level of the school? Right. So just think about this. And I have this, and I want to point out to you this little demographic, this little graphic I have here. Right. So if you look at so here on the right, looking at it on the right. So if the total school demographic profile is group A, and this is an extreme example, but if group A is 90% and group B is 10%, but when you do a demographic profile of your ensemble and you find that group B is 90% and group A is 10%, that means you're only drawing from here. That goes to show that you're only drawing from group B. Okay. Oops. Another way to look at it, all of these are going in here. Sorry about that. Okay, you're only drawing from here. We're not getting from this group. Okay. All right. Also, look at your demographics within instrument families and voice parts. Do you see imbalances? Okay, look at your demographics of students going out for the above and beyond performance opportunities, such as the regions in all states, and or any of these recommended honor ensembles that our organization sponsors and the regions are sponsoring. Right? Do you see imbalances, and are you including this as part of your Are you able to include this as part of your retention and recruitment efforts district wide? And also, just to expand a little bit on retention and recruitment efforts, right? That means, are you talking with the teachers who feed your program, and are you talking with the teachers whom you may feed, right? So are you looking at this from a district-wide lens, and from a, whenever you start in elementary school to whenever in high school, in terms of, are you looking at that in that retention lens also? Are you seeing specific demographics stop after a certain point? Review your concert literature over the past several years. How often are we performing works from composers from underrepresented groups? How often we didn't look at this in the data, but how often are we doing works by LGBTQ composers? How often are we playing music of Black composers from various parts of the world? How often are there opportunities for non-traditional instrumentation or voice parts? Are you talking with your kids about the background of the composers for whom you're playing, right? So this is a conversation I've had now with several music teachers in terms of, are we just looking for quality performance repertoire or literature to broaden your students' horizons, which will also provide them with the confidence of a successful performance? And I have to put my administrator hat on for a minute here, and I get that, and I understand that we do tend to look for the literature that's going to be of quality, high quality, and we want to give these kids, walking off that stage after the performance, to the opportunity to say, yes, we did a successful performance. But that's not the be all end all, Okay, and there are several databases out there. There's several diversity databases out there being floating around, which do support this notion of trying to find composers with various backgrounds. Okay, I mean, if we even just try to, look at gender in the sense of how often are you playing works by female composers, and I can tell you as when I was when I was directing ensembles as a teacher, not very often. And when you start to think back and look at it, and we understand that literature may be hard to find, but there's steps that we can take to broaden our kids' horizons, because we want to look at it also from the lens that not just trying to create excellent sounding groups, which we get that, but we also want to broaden the horizons of our kids and introduce them to literature from many different parts of the world, from various cultures, from various composers of various backgrounds. Okay, and again, this is and also this was a little pet peeve of mine as especially as a teacher. This is not the same question as how often are you playing a pop song in band. I'm going to admit to you, I cringe when I hear that question, because it's not about that. It Genre really shouldn't matter. We should be trying to find literature that is going to expose kids to a variety of cultures, traditions, composers, and as well as educate. Okay, and does your program include opportunities for kids to participate in non-traditional ensembles? And those could be formal or informal. Are kids themselves trying to develop some of these ensembles? Are we encouraging active musicking with non-traditional instruments, or are we very much in our band, orchestra, chorus mindsets? Okay, and with respect to membership, how do you have any music teacher friends who are not members? Well, encourage them to join. Where are they working, and what are the demographics of their students look like? This is a very simple point in some respects, to just encourage our friends who are music teachers who are not maybe members to join. Okay. Also, some other things to consider is we really want to loop in your administration. Okay, you talk with them about this work. Okay, they'll appreciate it. I'm going to speak as an administrator. I will bet good money that administrators will appreciate that you're doing this work. They'll help you find the necessary information if you don't have the access, and if you don't know where to find it, that's okay. They'll help you look for that information. Okay. Think about this, and this is really on the instrumental side. I've said this for my 7 years as an administrator now, that there is a de facto fee for joining the band and the orchestra. Okay, and somebody somewhere along the line has to provide the instrument. There is a cost. Okay, either the district is providing a loaner instrument, or the families of those students are going to get to rent the instruments. Okay, um, so there's a cost of all, and think about that, if that's preventing certain groups, especially students who are on free and reduced lunch, on preventing them from participating, right? I mean, and I probably speak for every band director out there. We want everybody to join. We want to encourage them to join. We're not trying to prevent anybody from joining. That's certainly not what we're saying. But if they can't get the instrument, they can't be in the band. So what are we going to do about that? That's something we just need to really consider. And this is, there's that de facto fee that we have to provide the student, or someone has to provide the student with an instrument and the necessary supplies, reeds, valve oil, rosin, etc. Right? Okay, and just think about this. There's a big picture here for music education, and there is some literature out there that suggests this, that there a vicious cycle, right? If we're not including students of all races and socioeconomic backgrounds into our programs, how do we expect to diversify music teacher ranks? And I know we didn't look at actual music teacher demographics, okay, but we can all kind of use our guts on this one, in the sense of that, we look at just your music teacher friends. I will make a bet they're probably all white guys or gals, and it's we have to try to see how are we going to be able to diversify our music teacher ranks, because if we're not including them into our music programs as K to 12 students, how are we going to get them to then come out into the world and be a music teacher? Okay. And also, are we being culturally responsive to our students? Okay. When we look around, if you start looking around to other parts of the country, you start seeing some other success stories and some other programs, in the sense that that are involving active musicking, but they may not be what we're used to seeing in terms of the traditional band, orchestra, or chorus. You see mariachi groups, you see other guitar groups, other technology-based groups. They're out there. We just have to see what we can do to be culturally responsive to our kids. Okay, the data does suggest that, and this data was presented to the NJMEA board in the beginning of January, and these suggestions are on here in terms of that. Um, we, as an organization, NJMEA should begin collecting equity data with the actual student demographics during the next school year, of course, pending COVID normalcy, which we all hope is coming back to normal this fall. We want to include events that where we have students participating as a school group, or the director submitting anonymous demographics, and events where kids are participating where as individuals, where the students are asked to complete a demographic survey with an option not to choose to participate. And the other recommendation is that we would develop some form of participation equity survey, asking for volunteer members to review and submit individual school membership programs with that equity lens, so that we could take a look at that as a larger organization. Okay, and again, these were just recommendations. These are not action steps. We don't they're right now they're recommendations based on the data. Okay, so please, I am very happy to discuss this further with anyone. My email is right there. I'm going to see if I can link it on the screencastify I'm using. I'm very happy to set up a video meeting up with anyone to discuss this further. This is a subject I'm becoming much more passionate about, that we want to get access to everybody. We want to have increased access to music education, and we want to increase just overall increasing access to arts education. Okay, and we're not just talking about theoretical access, but we want to see what is the actual access. Okay, well, I'm very happy to continue this data work and to benefit our kids. And again, I thank you.